Hello, we are live with Interchain Live. This is Ryan Munn. I'm in a different location today. I'm at the Optimist, a co-work space in beautiful Woodstock, Vermont. And I've got Paul Gambill on with us today from Nori. He's the CEO, and Nori is a carbon offset blockchain project. Paul, thanks for joining us. Paul, you there? Oh no, did you get muted?
How about that? Can you hear me now?
Awesome. Perfect. Perfect. Like I said, we keep it real here. So Paul, tell me a little bit. You're CEO of Nori now, but how did you get there?
Well, my background is in computer engineering and management. And for about 6 or 7 years, I was working as a product manager doing software consulting at places like Deloitte, where I was leading projects to build mobile apps for clients like Nike and Showtime and Starbucks. And then about 3 years ago, I wanted to work on something more than just consulting. And I had been reading an article about how climate scientists were becoming very depressed because no one was listening to them. And I started thinking about climate change from like an economic value opportunity, wondering why weren't more people just trying to solve the problem entirely instead of just making things less bad, which is what I always see people trying to do.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Perfect. Perfect. Yeah. It's amazing because, I've had some interesting conversation with farmers and advocates in the ag tech space. And one of the interesting concepts is we should be paying farmers to steward the land, and then the food we need should be a byproduct of that, and that would fundamentally create a better ecosystem.
Right. So there are a bunch of different problems that can be simultaneously solved by rewarding farmers for sequestering carbon dioxide in their soils.
Absolutely. Awesome. This partnership, you guys have a partnership right now with DuPont and some other partners in there as well. Why don't you tell us about that?
So it's with a company called Granular. They're a wholly owned subsidiary of DuPont. And Granular is a software management planning tool for farmers. You can think of it sort of like a CRM for farmers.
Okay.
So if you're a grower, a farmer, you need to track all sorts of different things around what crops you're growing on which fields, when you are planting, when you're harvesting, when you are watering. You need to be able to track movement if you have different people working on your farm, who's working on what at what time. So Granular helps solve all of these problems for the farmer and make that much more simple for them. And in the process of doing that, they're gathering a lot of data about their farm. And for Nori, what we're making is a marketplace that makes it very easy for people to get paid for sequestering carbon dioxide. And sequestering it in agricultural soils is really the first methodology that we're going to market with. And in order to measure and verify that that carbon has been sequestered in the soil, we have to gather a lot of data about the cropping practices. And so it's a really perfect match here where the farmers are already capturing much of that data to be input into Granular. And what we're building with Granular is a data connection so that a farmer using Granular could very easily just start getting paid via Nori for sequestering carbon in their soil. And the easier it gets, the more people will do it.
Excellent. Now, I'll put you on the spot a little bit here. One challenge that comes to mind, though, is that if commodities traders, various market players have this data in aggregate, the farmer who may be using some data, but they really are looking at their own data, may be at a disadvantage market-wise when it's time for them to actually take their crops to market. So where does that, how does Nori kind of maybe try to address that, or what factors come into play there?
That is a good question that I don't often get asked, but you're keying in on something very important, which is that farmers very much care about their proprietary data. That is really key and important for their business. And so what we're doing is we don't want to reveal their proprietary data publicly and on the blockchain, but we need to have that data coming in so that we can do the work of measuring and verifying. So I would say that, especially when we're talking about blockchain things, like Nori is not a totally decentralized application. It's a hybrid approach here. And so this is one of those areas where when it comes time to reveal the metadata about the specific carbon dioxide that was removed, we won't necessarily pin it down to the farm, but we might say to the county level inside the US, for example.
Gotcha.
So at least available.
So the Department of Agriculture would have, so a resource there as well to help them manage resources and figure out where they can get the most bang for their buck, so to speak.
Yeah, it's similar to the data that is already reported publicly to the USDA and to the state farm bureaus and that sort of thing.
Gotcha. Excellent. Excellent. And I'm going to make a little bit of a plug here for Vermont. There's an interesting project. If you're not aware of it, I would encourage you guys to look at, and I could make a connection there. Is Landstream. A gentleman named Abe Collins has been working with a really prominent thinker in this space. And for 30 years, they've been working with a ranch, combination of sensor technology for tracking information as well as sustainable farming practices. And they've taken that ranch in 30 years from a 50% runoff rate to a 0% runoff rate with an absorption capability of 10 inches of rain.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, so I know you'd appreciate that. And it's amazing. One of the things that I find is exciting about blockchain is the potential to interconnect all of these people that, like you said, they're almost depressed. They're some light at the end of the tunnel with blockchain technology and with emerging technologies, sharing data and really enabling collaboration and consortiums. So it's really exciting to see that. And you guys are definitely right at the forefront. So tell me a little bit about the carbon offset market inefficiencies. I know that, I'm fairly familiar with sort of the general banking inefficiency, like how ledgers work, the way our stock market works. It's kind of crazy. I won't get into the details right now, right? It's amazing to me how much we take for granted that has been broken for decades. And so carbon markets have been invented more recently, but really inherited the same ledger problems as our traditional financial system. But give me a little bit more insight into the specifics of the carbon market.
Sure. So when looking at carbon markets, we have to consider that there's a difference between compliance markets and voluntary markets. And the compliance markets would be governments saying mostly cap and trade. So California has a market like this. The EU has a market like this, where they have regulated entities who, say like a power utility, who are given a cap of how much they're allowed to emit every year. And then the state gives them a certain number of allowances. And these are basically pieces of paper, certificates that say this is, you're allowed to emit 1 ton of greenhouse gas per allowance. And if you go over your cap, you need to buy more allowances from someone who might have a surplus in order to meet your regulatory obligation. What happens, though, is the state always issues more allowances out there than are necessary because they have to have a surplus in order for trading to happen in the market.
Right.
So, because by definition, there will always be a surplus. That means that these certificates, which say that they should represent 1 ton of CO2 equivalent, actually represent less than 1 ton because there are more certificates than are needed to do that.
It's inflationary.
It is inflationary. And so and they continue to do this. If you look at combining the EU and California, there's something like well over 2 billion with a B, unsold credits that are like this. If you're a regulated entity, you can buy surplus from the market, you can buy them from the government at auction, which happens periodically, or you can do things like invest in renewables, which is really what they want you to do.
Right.
If you're in California, for example, you're allowed to buy up to 8% of your obligation from offset credits. And offset projects are a little bit different. So an offset project might be planting a forest or building a wind farm or a solar farm or building a dairy digester, which converts dairy waste so that it doesn't emit methane, but it instead emits carbon dioxide, which is far less warming. But you're only allowed to buy up to 8% because think about it this way. If you're a utility and you have the option of buying these meaningless pieces of paper that represent 1 ton of CO, or less than 1 ton, or you buy offset credits that are coming from a real project that created jobs and affected some community some way and has a real narrative story that you can tell, which one are you going to choose to buy?
Right. Yeah, you want the story, you want the impact.
Of course. And so that's why they put a cap on the amount of credits that you can buy, because otherwise everyone would just go buy offset credits and would never buy the allowances that they sell. So, but here's the really pernicious part. California has dealt with pricing issues by instituting a price floor. So if you look at the history of trading prices of these allowances in the California market, it just goes up on a step function every year. So they're not valuing them above the floor price. But if you are an offset project developer, you're basically stuck with what they're willing to pay in the California market. So that floor price becomes a price ceiling for your offset projects.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah. That, I mean, really what you're describing is a bunch of paper tokens, right? I mean, these are different, that's all a token is, just a contract that represents what you define it as.
And I'm not even getting to the double counting problems yet.
Right. Yeah. That was where I was going to go next. So they already have these 2 units of account in this carbon offset and carbon, CO2 credits, allowances.
Yeah. Allowances.
Right. And then you have some market components, but it's not free market, which in theory gives us the best results. Right. It's a regulated, controlled market they're trying to set standards around and trying to create a price floor. And ultimately, the result is they're creating a ceiling for other places. So now what happens when traders, speculators, and industry are in this market and there's a shift in value, and one trader sees that coming, wants to buy in. They want to leverage their buy-in to maximize their potential or to maybe hedge another bet. What happens to those credits as it goes through that system?
Well, one of the things that I really don't like about the current system is that you can resell these credits over and over and over again. So if you're a trader and you're looking at different various price signals to determine where you should buy or sell, one of those price signals is obviously going to be transaction volume. But if you're taking the same credit and you're selling it repeatedly over and over and over again, that represents transaction volume, but doesn't represent any additionally new carbon emissions dealt with in any way. So one way that we're solving this at Nori is we're creating a market for carbon removal exclusively, which is different from these carbon offsets. And carbon offsets can be just carbon avoided. And we think about it like, for decades, we have been emitting carbon dioxide. It's like we're throwing our garbage out on the street. And every initiative that people have talked about is just saying, let's throw slightly less garbage out on the street. And Nori is saying, no, let's go pick up the garbage and go move it somewhere and maybe try to find a way to reuse it somehow.
Right.
So we're creating carbon removal certificates where each certificate represents 1 ton of CO2 removed from the atmosphere and stored in the earth somehow. And when that certificate gets sold to a buyer, it becomes immediately retired. Retirement is the language in these carbon markets. So retired means that it cannot be resold. It is non-transferable. And by doing that, we're eliminating the problem of constantly reselling these things. And by putting all of this data about who owns it at what time on the blockchain, we're eliminating double counting issues that are constantly plaguing carbon markets out there. And double counting is a really, really serious issue when you see different countries. We just had the recent COP in Poland, the Conference of the Parties, which is the UN's international meetings every year to discuss climate change. And you had countries like Brazil saying that they have issues with some of the mechanisms that have been put forward because they're concerned about double counting. So Nori solves that problem just inherently by using the blockchain to track these.
Excellent. Excellent. So now how does the value get created in that if somebody can buy that carbon offset, the
carbon removal certificate.
Carbon removal, yeah, okay. Carbon removal certificate.
Oh, CRC.
So, PRC? No, CRC. Okay, carbon removal certificate. Okay, got it. CRC. Now, if somebody can purchase that, now what's the value to the purchaser if they can't then resell it?
So the buyers in this market, at least initially, and I'll tell you about the long-term vision afterwards, but at least initially, these are going to be corporations who are falling into kind of two different categories. The first category is really relevant to the fact that we're doing regenerative agriculture. So this is farmers storing it in their soils. Now, it's helpful to know that there are some other benefits that come from storing carbon in your soil. For one, you're going to retain water significantly better, which is what you were alluding to when talking about that project in Vermont. Because what happens is you're planting your crops and then cover crops in the row in between the rows of crops, and then you're not tilling the land. So you're when you till or plow the land, you're turning over that soil, which exposes all of the organic matter that's in there, the bacteria, the fungi, the nematodes, the worms, whatever. And when they get exposed to air, they die and decompose and release all of that carbon back up into the atmosphere.
Yep.
So no-till agriculture doesn't do that, and it keeps all of that down there, so you're growing more and more organic matter. When you have more organic matter, you can retain water, and you're also going to grow better and more crops. So these farmers are going to see increased crop yields over time. So now, on the corporate side, on the buyer side, think about if you're a large food producer where you need to be buying commodity crops, wheat, corn, soy, whatever. You're buying this from farmers, and they're your supply chain that you're dependent on. Without them, you don't have a product. So you want to see the farmers in your supply chain doing this to restore the health and quality of their soil, retain water better, increase their crop yields. You're going to see the cost savings pass up the supply chain, and you're going to feel more secure that you're going to have crops available for you to buy in the future. So this is the first category of customers for us. These are large food producers who just want to see their farmers sequestering carbon. Yes, they want the benefit of also sequestering carbon and getting the credit for that. But this is just good business for them.
So two questions come to mind. Would your system provide the capability for the farmers to write essentially a future contract on their CRC and even write that contract to basically include the food product as a dividend to those contracts for the food purchaser, for the, say, Walmart? You know, they want to source food, they want it going right to shelf nearby, and they want to make sure they're having this impact. So they're going to put all the money behind the CRC and say, we'll buy all these CRCs as long as we know that we're also going to get XYZ for produce. And then, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, more or less. Now, we're still working through the regulatory side of this, which this is fun because not only do we have to work with the SEC, but we also have to work with the CFTC on this, because now we're getting into the land of, are these futures or not? So what we are trying to design is a way to have forward contracts, not futures, because that's regulated in a different way. But we would want to have forward contracts where the farmers could choose to sell a specific number of CRCs that they choose to a buyer at a set price that was negotiated at the time of the forward contract, and then they deliver it at a future date. And Nori just helps them settle that by doing the transaction in our application. So yeah, we're working on giving them the ability to do that because that is something that's important for that industry.
And then I would imagine, you know, so I've been having a lot of conversations around food supply chain transparency. I imagine you guys would be able to plug in essentially with other solutions that have, say, tied into some of the machinery used to milk the cows, or you know, some of the sensors in the soil to pull things up, and integrate with some of that food supply chain solutions.
Yeah, we definitely envision being part of that ecosystem as it grows.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit more about the Nori ecosystem and how the token economics work in your platform.
So we are creating a finite number of Nori tokens. It's 500 million. And so think about it this way. There are an infinite number of CRCs and a finite number of Nori tokens. And the Nori token, one token always purchases 1 ton of CO2 removed, or 1 CRC.
Okay.
So the Nori token acts like a gift card or a coupon for a future carbon purchase, meaning you can buy Nori tokens today and lock in the price that you pay for carbon, and then use the Nori tokens in the future. So you could buy, if you're a company, you could buy 5 years worth of tokens today, lock in the price that you pay, and then every year use them to pay for removing the carbon emissions from your business activities.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so the Nori token is where the trading should happen. Whatever price speculation is going to happen, whatever hedging, buying, selling, anything like that is going to be on the Nori token. And then that way that separates that from the CRC so that the CRC only gets sold once and is immediately retired.
Gotcha. So, but the Nori token, is it one for one Nori token for one CRC?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And then,
so that opens up the space. So what kind of you have some kind of a discount in the initial offering, or where are you at with that?
Well, let me say one more thing about the Nori token, which is that the price of the Nori token, since it represents buying 1 ton, the price of the Nori token should be seen as a universal market-driven price on carbon, which is something that the world has been clamoring for a very long time. So yes, right now we are selling tokens we're selling instruments that can convert into tokens. My little lawyer sitting on my shoulder is reminding me of that. So we're selling in 2 different sales. Through the end of the year, we are selling a Regulation CF crowdfund campaign on Republic. So that's republic.co/Nori.
Great.
And
awesome.
Anyone can go there and invest in Nori, where you don't have to be an accredited investor. Americans can participate, but you'll have to go there to see all the details about that. I'm legally not allowed to talk much more about the terms.
Sure, no problem.
We also have a sale going on for accredited investors. And for accredited investors and corporate customers, we're selling 2 different classes of tokens. The first class are Class A tokens, and these are being sold for 7.5 cents per, it's a SAFT, simple agreement for future tokens. So it's 7.5 cents per SAFT, which would get you a token in the future. 1 token so think of it like 7.5 cents per ton of CO2. And we're selling these to corporate customers with the requirement that they cannot resell Nori tokens. They have to use them to buy CRCs. We're doing that so that we can go to the suppliers and the farmers in our marketplace and say, look, we've already pre-sold 19 million tons worth of CO2. They have to buy CRCs with these. Don't you want to come participate? So it's a good signal to them that way. We're also selling Class B tokens to investors. These are 15 cents a ton, and they can be resold if they want to, or they can use them to buy carbon dioxide. But we're creating that class to send the signal to the suppliers.
That's great. That's great. And can you say what your sort of go live date is, as far as when any deadlines that you have or launches?
It's probably preliminary to say a specific date. We are intending to launch this early mid 2019, so next year. But there are still some issues some challenges to overcome, including both the regulatory side of things. We're in talks with both of those agencies that I mentioned, as well as working with suppliers. So right now we're working with different farmers who have been doing these practices. We're gathering their data, and we're just iterating on what's the best way for us to gather that data and get it in to the market and produce CRCs from that. And then we're also working with verifiers right now. These are independent third parties who would be doing the verification work, and we're working to put together the standards for that. We're also working with different universities around the country and world to have some of the top soil scientists in the world act as peer reviewers who will validate the methodology that we come up with for measuring, and that we publish for measuring the CO2 removed, so that we get credibility from the scientific community on what it is that we're doing. So there are a bunch of different things going on. Real quick, if I can, I wanted to go back to talking about like the buyer side of things just a little bit.
Yeah. So you mean the buyer of the Nori tokens, or the buyer of the CRC credits?
Of the CRCs, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Go ahead.
So there were food producers. That's one group of companies, and then the other group, it would be companies that are doing this for PR, social impact reasons, where there's been a lot of financial analysis in the last few years that are showing that companies that invest in this sort of thing are more profitable than companies
like rebuild a local park and get better biosphere around that park, and they could demonstrate carbon sequestration and get a good PR bump.
Yeah, or think about like if you're an airline or a cruise line and you emit a lot of carbon in the operation of your business, what if you could tell your customers, hey, we've already paid to clean up the carbon emissions from this flight. So you can fly on this airline knowing that you're not responsible for contributing anything more to climate change. Like that's a really beneficial way to differentiate themselves with their customers, and there's evidence for this now. But our long-term vision is that what we're creating is really like an API for reversing climate change. So imagine, because this is software now, we can plug this into all sorts of different applications. Imagine you take an Uber or Lyft ride, and at the end of the ride, you get asked by the app, do you want to have McDonald's play an ad and then they'll pay for cleaning up the carbon from the ride that you just took? So your ride is carbon neutral. You don't even pay for it. And then in the background, McDonald's would purchase a carbon removal certificate just automatically because we've got the ability to do that. Or imagine you pull up to the gas station and in the same purchase as buying the gas, you pay for removing the carbon from the gas that you just bought.
Yeah.
This is how we scale this thing to the point where we're actually removing enough CO2 to make a real impact on climate change and ultimately restore the carbon balance back to what it was before the Industrial Revolution. It's only through commoditization of carbon that we can do that.
That's incredible. This is really, really awesome. It's great what you guys are doing, and I'm excited to see it happening. Are you working currently with anybody in Vermont? Are you aware of any farmers that you guys are getting data from, or? The Gund Foundation, GUND, is a project at UVM that's been going on for a few decades now, with the intention of basically recording and categorizing natural resources.
I don't know them specifically. I do know that we've been working with people in Vermont and New Hampshire on that are involved in the FarmOS project.
Okay.
But I'll have to check to see if anyone else on my team knows about these projects that you're mentioning.
Yeah, awesome. And I like I said, I'd love to make introductions and make some connections. And it's amazing. You know, I was speaking with someone not long ago about, you know, what Walmart's done with their EDI system and how they've really changed the way they're sourcing food. And it's really great to see some of these big companies getting on board. But at the end of the day, we still need the transparency to see that, well, they're doing these great things over here. How do we make sure they're not cutting corners somewhere else,
right,
to make it, keep the status quo?
Yeah.
And I think there's a big opportunity to really drive home this sort of the small mom and pop farmer opportunities, the smaller grocers, and all of these sort of farm to market kind of ecosystems that can really be enabled with lowering the barriers with technology like this, and bringing money in from a Walmart to help support a farm that's doing some unique product, but that also opens it up so that they can produce enough and do something with the local market too.
Yeah, exactly. That's a big goal of what we're doing, because right now, if you're doing a carbon offsets project, the barriers to entry are enormously high, and we want to reduce that as much as possible. Make it possible for these smallholder farmers to be able to participate.
Absolutely, absolutely. So talk to me a little about, where you see the future of blockchain technology and this whole kind of activism that's going on. And it's very entrepreneurial. I mean, we are very capitalistic in the space. And at the same time, there's so much sort of almost socialist concepts that come out of what blockchain is and the collaboration there. And a lot of people get a little bit mixed up with that. And the way I try to describe it is I say, we're still capitalists. We're just capitalists on the human value level. Right. Yeah. We all compete with who can provide the best value, but then the systems and protocols we all rely on are becoming very socialized and open and universal. But
doing well by doing good. And
absolutely.
And that's I definitely agree that is the future, and that's what excites me so much about, like, we're building on Ethereum, and that, like, those values that you just described are so readily apparent in the Ethereum community. And that's what excited me years ago when I learned about Ethereum and started getting interested in it and wanting to find a way to work within this ecosystem. It is people who are just trying to solve problems. That's ultimately what this is all about. We're just trying to solve problems and make the world a better place to live in. And we finally have the tools that enable us to bypass some of the barriers that governments and large corporations put up to prevent us from doing so. So I'm really excited by that. When it comes to blockchain technology itself, I think that Now, don't get me wrong. I am 100% a fan of the decentralized ethos and very much favor pushing everything towards that as much as possible. But I do think that sometimes some of the more prominent figures in the blockchain space get a little hung up on like 100% perfect decentralization. And I think that the future is going to be much more of a hybridized approach, like what we're doing with Nori, where there are elements of using the blockchain where it's necessary and useful, like providing transparency and creating the cryptocurrency aspect and that sort of thing. But there are also aspects of it where it is kind of useful to have an intermediary or a third party, a trusted third party who is building up credibility in different ways to provide services. So I think that that's going to be the future that evolves, at least in the next 5 to 10 years or so, as more and more companies dig into that.
Well, you know, I talk a lot about how this is really just another step in the evolution of the democratic experiment.
Yeah.
And a lot of, you know, techies, I love them, but they seem to miss a lot of history. They, you know, they really got into the video games and the coding. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I got into that when I was in high school, and that's why I have the ability to kind of connect and understand some of this stuff. But it's the concept of our government, the way it was designed, was actually built on the concept of decentralization. It was very limited power in the federal government, pushing that down to the states, still limiting power in the states, pushing that down to the people, and then the municipality representing the people and giving them the real voice to define how they are governed locally, is the core of decentralization.
Yeah.
And so while, you know, there's a lot of sort of rah around decentralized, it's still in a learning curve, right? You've got the rest of the world's in this learning curve about blockchain and crypto and technology in general, digital transformation. But then we have these brilliant future thinking people that are so far ahead that they've sometimes missed the connection. They're in a learning curve in realizing how these ideas, how these manifestations of technology implement into what we've been working on for thousands of years, which is how do we have a shared voice? How do we express opinions respectfully and appropriately, discern the value or the data that we need, the facts out of that dialogue, and then implement actions to take the next step. And that's what protocoling things with blockchain enables us to do. And we have to be willing to fall on our face a little bit, make some mistakes, so that we can look at the data, knowing that now we have an immutable record of what happened, so we can make better decisions going forward.
Yeah, this technology is really hard, and like what you're saying, is ultimately leading us more towards like the American founders' vision of rule of law, not rule of men, and but we have to do so carefully, as there can be consequences.
And the other thing is too, is we are so caught on the concept of law being set in stone, when I like to joke that it's not really a code of law, it's a code of theories.
Yeah.
A bunch of theories that we should try to abide by, but when something comes into question, we should test those theories and prove out results in order to make new decisions. And societally, we've got really stuck on, well, that's the law. We got to go by the law. And this concept of code is law is kind of exciting, because it's the idea that, yes, we can put things in sort of in writing, but we can also create protocols around consensus and decision making, which allow us to continually check and balance that process. And
that's a good point. I think it's an interesting one, because when you look at like actual law, like law always follows and lags behind cultural changes. And by implementing this in more technology, we're able to more quickly adapt to changes in culture, to accommodate those changes, so that we're not stuck with antiquated laws that were built for a different time.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So there's one last point I want to hit on, and it's a little bit of a maybe a little bit of a jab at the propaganda in the space. But you know, there's all this talk about how much energy blockchains use and all of that, and that's arguable and debatable. I have a very strong opinion that the cost of that energy is much less than the cost of any other energy applied to previous trust systems in our society. You know, the amount of gas and nuclear power it takes to run our military and run, you know, the good faith and credit of the U.S. is quite substantial.
Right.
And so, you know, that's my opinion there. But let's say for the argument that there is a challenge of power usage. There always will be. We're implementing systems. We're always trying to build things that are more efficient, and there's always going to be a power cost. How do you see the Nori system sort of working with the broader, Ethereum ecosystem and blockchain mining and computing and even data center computing infrastructure in a way that helps to maybe mitigate some of those concerns or even alleviate the real issue there?
Yeah, so I think about this in two ways. One is one of the reasons that we're building on Ethereum is, well, among many, of course, that's where all the developer tools are. This is where the developer community is congregated. It just makes a lot of sense to do that. You also get the liquidity of all the other Ethereum-based tokens. But it's also that they've been very committed to the plan of moving towards proof of stake. And with that on the roadmap for sometime in the middle of next year, that's right on target for us as well. So that does dramatically reduce the energy usage of the blockchain. The other way to think about it is that now Nori is a way for people to clean up carbon emissions. So if you are committed to using a proof of work blockchain that uses enormous amounts of energy, just buy some Nori CRCs and pay for cleaning up that carbon. Like our perspective and philosophy on this is carbon emissions are not morally bad. Energy usage has enabled the world to dramatically improve the lives of humans everywhere. The fact that we have seen poverty drop so dramatically so that it is very, very small, poverty rates are very low now internationally. That's because of all of our energy usage and global trade and all those things that go together. So energy is good, and people should be able to fly and travel and do anything with energy without feeling bad about it. Just treat it like garbage. We don't try to live in a garbage-free society right now. We pay for people to collect our garbage and go store it somewhere responsibly. Let's just do the same thing with carbon.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. Well, awesome. I really appreciate you coming on with us today. This has been a great conversation. I feel like we could probably go on for a couple of hours, going down a few rabbit holes here. And I'm really excited to watch what Nori's doing. And as you guys move forward, hopefully I can make some connections for you too and help accelerate the progress.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Thanks for having me on, Ryan.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you to my audience for watching and plugging in and keeping tuned on what's important in the world today. My name's Ryan Munn. This is Interchain Live, and we'll see you later.